Let's get started. So good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're pretty excited this morning. So we just want to say a quick hello to everyone. And if you have any challenges hearing or anything, Kim's going to talk about that stuff in a minute. But I just wanted to say welcome. And we're going to be introducing our guest speaker today, who we're really excited to see her presentation. But for now, my name is Sherry Lozier. I am a director with Distinctability. And with me today is also my partner and co-founder, Kim Neal. And so Kim's going to take it away.
Hi, thank you so much, Kelly, and welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join us for today's iNOD session, Creating and Sustaining a Neurodiverse Organizational Culture. This is the fourth in our monthly series of our iNOD stimulus sessions. We kicked off with our grand session on World Autism Day this year for our big iNOD session, which went from a large event down to a 2-hour micro session. So we've been thrilled to be able to offer these presentations of the speakers that we had originally lined up for that day and share their full presentations with you month over month. So we're very, very excited to have our special guest speaker, Kelly Bron Johnson, here today from Completely Inclusive. So Kelly Bron Johnson is an adult diagnosed autistic self-advocate from Montreal. She is a published author and founder of Completely Inclusive, a consultancy that teaches businesses how to make their workplaces accessible and inclusive to all. She's a board member of Autism Canada, as well as the co-chair of their ASD Advisory Committee. She is also hard of hearing and currently learning ASL. Being the proud mother of 2 children with disabilities, they are her inspiration and to make a path to employment and full integration in society easier for others. This year, Kelly was also nominated for RBC's Most Influential Women of Canada. So we are delighted to welcome Kelly Bron Johnson. And from there, I will hand it over to you, Kelly. Thank you.
Thank you. So I put my welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm hearing an echo. Is anybody else hearing an echo?
So I just wanted to touch base. I completely forgot housekeeping because I got so excited about talking about your bio, Kelly. So if everybody could kindly mute themselves, that would be great. We have no background noise. But if you would like to keep your camera on, we'd love to see your smile. We will ask the questions, Kelly, for you. So on that note, if you could kindly mute your microphones, that would be great. And if you have any tech issues, there was a slide there. You can text that number or drop us a line. If we drop, just log out and log back in, and we will reconnect. Thank you. That is it this time.
Perfect. Okay, so hi everybody. I wrote ladies and gentlemen, and that's going to be the way that I'm going to start all my talks from now on, now that I've heard those interesting and fun terms. This is one of the ways to be super inclusive to all people, rather than using the gendered ladies and gentlemen. So I just think it's really cute, and I'm non-binary myself, so I wanted to welcome everybody with ladies and gentlemen. So I have my own housekeeping to start with. And one thing is, this talk is about neurodiversity and creating neurodiverse workplace cultures. But it's really, really important to remember intersectionality in everything that we do. Nobody exists in a silo. People always bring multiple identities and labels with them. So for example, I am Black, I'm non-binary, I'm autistic, I'm hard of hearing, and I bring all those different identities with me wherever I go. This influences how I see the world. And we can't just look at inclusivity or inclusion as checking a box and saying, well, I've got this and I've got that. It really has to be global. You have to really look at all the different issues. And it's also really important to remember too, when we're talking about neurodiversity, we know for a fact that 70% of all people, specifically on the autism spectrum, are also part of the LGBTQ community. And LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bi, transsexual, transgender, queer, questioning, and allies, and so on and so on. So because we're part of those communities, it's very rare that we're not part of those communities, and especially in the autistic community, if we're friends with other autistics, we will also be friends with people in the LGBTQ community just by default. So it's really important to make sure that we're addressing all the needs in a workplace, and that we can't just do one part of inclusion in isolation, and you can't compartmentalize it. Also, in my talk, I use the word disabled. I use disabled with a capital D, in fact, to say that that's part of my community as well. It's not a dirty word. I know some people get uncomfortable when they hear that I say I'm disabled, or they say that I am autistic, again with a capital A, to be part of that community. And it's no different really than when I say I'm Black with a capital B, or the deaf community using deaf as deaf culture with a capital D. And so understanding that disability not being, it's just a difference, it's not a bad thing, but there are disabling aspects to my life and my experience. And that the only difference really is about how we view it in society and what kind of accommodations that we're providing to people. Sometimes I like to bring up, if we can, although I can't see you right now because of the way that my setup is, anybody who's wearing glasses, whoever's wearing glasses can wave or raise their hand. And I say, congratulations, you're disabled. And a lot of times people who wear glasses don't view themselves as disabled, but wearing glasses are a assistive device. Without them, you will probably have some disabling effects. You might have headaches, you might have problems navigating, you're not going to see far or see near. And so glasses are an assistive device. However, just in society, they become cool and accepted to the point where nobody even views it as a disability anymore. And my whole goal is to start having all disabilities seen in the same way, that we could look at hearing aids and not even think for a second that that's something really different, or see a wheelchair and not really pay any mind to it, or be able to walk up to somebody and say, you know, the same way that you say, hey, your glasses are super cool, you got new glasses, and you could be, hey, you got a new cane and it looks super nice. So all these assistive devices and all these accommodations, I think they should become just mainstream. And that's the idea of the social model of disability. So I started this with a quote, and unfortunately, I don't even know who to credit for it. So it says, you don't change culture through emails and memos. You change it through relationships, one conversation at a time. And again, this is about, it's not about having inclusion by checking boxes and sending out an email to the company saying, now we're inclusive. You need to start having really real and really deep conversations with your employees. Change doesn't come from, you know, just saying that it happens. Same way that telling somebody that they're safe doesn't automatically mean that they're in a safe space. So it's really important to validate what people's actual experiences are, and to talk to them about what's important to them, and to really get down to the meat of that, and have really open and honest conversations. If your workplace culture is one of openness and one where people are able to share their vulnerabilities and share what they need, to me, this is what brings long-term change and actually really effective change. Aha, time for the pop quiz.
All right.
So I have the questions here, but yeah, Kim, if you want to launch the quiz.
All right, so we're going to launch the first question first. One sec. And here we go. If you could all take a moment to answer, what conditions are included under the neurodivergence umbrella? And you may select any of these as you wish. and it is anonymous. And we'll give you about 20 seconds.
This is a really great question to ask, because I think that for a lot of people, we don't really always understand the language that we use, even when we use it regularly. So this is a really great question.
Absolutely. So it's interesting because some are very clear, and then some are a little less.
Mm-hmm.
Come on, there's 5 people that need to vote. Give you another few seconds.
No pressure, no pressure.
No pressure. Sorry, no pressure. The clock is.
But you know, I mean, I like having interaction. If people thought they were just going to sit here and stare at a screen, then they're in the wrong place.
Wonderful.
Too bad.
Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I'll end that. So across the board, autism, ADHD, dyslexia, epilepsy, dyspraxia, obsessive compulsive disorder, and Tourette syndrome all were selected, as well as other.
Mm-hmm.
Kelly.
So,
but it's interesting because there are some of them that, there was a number who selected. So epilepsy, for example, 44% selected, but autism was 100%, and ADD and ADHD was 100%. So that was really interesting.
That is interesting. Thank you. All right, we have another 2 questions for you.
Well, I was just going to give some feedback on that. Epilepsy is not a neurodivergent issue. And if we put other, we can add in mental health issues, and we can add dyscalculia, which is a issue with mathematics, which is similar to dyslexia, except with numbers.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kelly. All right, are you ready for number 2? So there's 2 questions in this one, if all goes to plan. And so I'll take this away. There you go. So time to vote.
What population of the population is neurodivergent? Oh, I love watching the numbers come in.
Oh, you're able to see those now.
This
That's
I'm able
great.
to see, yeah. I'm
Amazing.
able to see that.
Okay, perfect. Will you tell me when you've had enough numbers there?
Did most people vote?
There's
We're 10 out of 12.
10 out of 12, but there's 3 of us, so we're pretty much there.
Okay. So
there you are.
The actual number of the population, so the percentage of the population that's neurodivergent, is actually 15%. We have in Canada right now between 22 and 24, depending on if you go by 216 or 218 stats, of percentage of people who are disabled. But the breakdown of the people who are actually neurodivergent is 15%. But again, remember that these identities can overlap, so people can have a physical disability and a neurodivergent brain, or they can have all sorts of different intersections. But the general accepted number right now for neurodivergence is 15%. Now, this is a bit of a trick question. The percentage of autistic community that is unemployed or underemployed, I put up a range of numbers. I'm glad that nobody got it wrong, and because basically, depending on if you go on UK stats and you go on American stats or Canadian stats and who you ask and when the studies were done, you'll see numbers anywhere between 65 and 85%. I believe truthfully that 85% is closer to what the actual numbers are. And that unfortunately doesn't correlate with our levels of education. Most of the time it correlates with our level of inexperience, simply because we haven't been given the opportunities to go into the workplace and to try and fail. So that whole phase in life when many times a teenager will go out and get a little part-time job, most neurodivergent people have not had that experience. And when it's time for them to go out into the world and get a real job and start a career, they're usually not given the same opportunities. And then there's a whole lot of other factors that play into that, which I'm actually going to touch on. I think I can close the poll. That's okay. Okay. So why be inclusive? And there's going to be a whole bunch of reasons that I'm going to bring up, but I'm going to start with a few things. And innovation, creativity, and productivity are probably the biggest strengths that the neurodivergent brain has. And I say we were made for this. We were born for this. If we're going to say that, evolutionary speaking, we need different brains to do different tasks and to have different strengths in a community. We are the ones that have these brains that were basically made to think outside the box for whatever reason. And so we exist in a world that's not made for us. We are the minority. And because we're living in a world that's not made for us, we have to adapt, and we have to be very creative and find our own accommodations and our own ways to get things done. And I'll give an example of the interesting kind of problem solving skills that we can have. So for example, when my son was very small, he was, I think, around three or four, and he was essentially nonverbal. And he was doing speech therapy with the therapist, and she had this little box that had different locks and keys to open the doors, and talking to him and trying to get him to solve puzzles. And she asked him to do something in a particular way. And he went and did it in a completely like reverse sort of way, but he got the right answer. And she said, you know, I've never seen anybody do it that way before, but it's not wrong. And he got the correct result. So it's just really interesting because sometimes, especially in school, as we're growing up, we might still get the same or the correct result, but the teacher wants to see our work, and they want to see how we did it, and they want us to do it in a particular way. And this can be very difficult because sometimes that particular way is not the way that works for our brains. And so I would like you to take this message and carry this into the workplace and realize that sometimes maybe just the work just needs to be done, and it doesn't always have to be done in the way that you're going to expect it. And in fact, sometimes the ways that we come up with might be super creative and more efficient if you allow us to have that flexibility to come up with things in our way. And that to me is what brings innovation. Because if you want the same kind of products and you want the same kind of solutions created, then by all means keep hiring more of the same people who think the same way. If you want something to be really innovative, you have to hire people who are going to think in a completely different way, you know, really turn it on its head, so to speak, no pun intended, and come up with ideas and ways of looking at things that are going to be completely different and open your market to a whole different group of people as well. The other great things that we have, you know, ADHD people are very creative. And again, that creativity comes from that energy that they have when they're able to hyper-focus. And then there are going to be other times when there's going to be gaps in skills, and there's going to be changes in productivity. But if you allow them to work in a way that's optimized for them, and the way that when they're most productive, then I think you're going to see just amazing results and amazing change. So some of the strengths that, like I was listing, was that hyper focus, eye for detail, seeing patterns. I see patterns in everything, and because I see patterns, I see bugs. So I see grammar errors. For me, my skill, I guess, is with language, written language, not so much speaking, but here I am speaking. And it's interesting because when I look at computer code, I don't have to speak the language. I don't have to know the computer code in order to see there's a mistake somewhere. So I will find a bug in code just because I'm following the patterns and not because I understand how to program. Some of us, I'm not going to say all of us, but some of us have really good either long-term or short-term memory, or sometimes both, or we might have memory for dates or numbers. I know for me, I have a photographic memory. So for example, in university, I didn't really study really well. What I do is I look at the textbook, and I'll often read it once. And and I kind of scan the page. I read very quickly, but I almost take a photograph of the page in my head. And then when I'm in an exam, all I have to do is remember to flip through the book in my head, and I can go back to the page and see the photo that I took in my mind, and then reread it so I get the answer that I need. I know when I say that, it probably sounds super weird, or I'm not sure. But that's one of the I guess fun party tricks that I have in my head. We're often very honest and direct. And some people might say too direct, but because of that, we're just not very good liars. Some people might be more impulsive on the impulsive side, and will do what's called confabulation, which is not actually lying. They believe that what they have said is actually what has happened. And there's ways to get around that as well. There's ways to understand the social implications of that. So it's not something that is fixed and not fixable. And even those, the fact that I don't have a filter a lot of the time. I need to know when to keep my mouth shut, or what to say outside, or what to say in my head. And those are skills that can be worked on. And it's important that even with, if these kind of skills that use the potential, use the most of the positive potential, and then do training and support to work on the parts that aren't as favorable. Again, we're very rule-based, justice-based, open-minded, accepting. I think a lot of the neurodivergent crowd is some of the most accepting people you'll ever find. I know growing up, people always said, Kelly, I can tell you anything and you're not going to be shocked. And it's pretty much true. I'd say it's true. And even better, people came and told me all sorts of stuff because they knew I wouldn't tell anybody, because I hardly had any friends. So, sorry. We're colorful, we're funny, we're logical a lot of the times. I say playful or childlike because sometimes people will interpret that as childish. For instance, I have a lot of toys. Like on my desk right now, I've got my little Japanese squishy toys. And I'm almost 40 years old. So that to me is just playful. It's fun. You don't adult in the same way. And I think that's okay. Again, it's harmless. We're curious, so we question a lot. We question the status quo. And so a lot of how we live our life is not based on societal pressure. We're not really we don't really play into peer pressure. And we are perseverant and creative and musical and on and on and on and on. So now that you know all the amazing stuff about us, how do you attract us? And I almost feel like we're trying to catch an animal or creature of some sort. But anyways, how do you attract this unicorn then that we are? And I'd say the first step is to use inclusive language. It's important that we start to, again, it's not about being, a lot of people will say, well, this is just being politically correct. It's also about making people comfortable. And when we make people comfortable to be open and who they are, especially in the workplace, they're less likely to be distracted trying to cover up or mask who they really are. And they're going to spend more of their time just being comfortable and enjoying themselves at work. So elements of inclusive language, they should be in your communications, in the way that you speak to your employees every day, which would be respecting their name if they have changed their name or they want to be called by a certain name. It should respect their pronouns if they want to be called they or he or she. That's really something that doesn't take any time or any cost to implement, to make sure that you're being inclusive to everybody. I try to make sure that I'm not saying like, hey guys. I would say, hey folks. And again, that thadies and gentledoms, which I just learned recently, and I just think is so cute. But again, it's just a way of acknowledging that it's safe for people to be who they are at your workplace, and to make new employees or potential candidates also know that they are, that they're welcome. So that's the whole point of stating that you welcome and want to accommodate disabled people. There's different ways that you can do this. And one thing I often say is, especially on websites, it's important to start trying to make your websites accessible as well. And one of the things you can do is say that on your website, we are trying to become more inclusive. We're working at it. It's a work in progress. If you have any feedback for us, here's an email, and you should have a designated email where people can give that feedback, and then by all means, please implement it. Take that feedback and do something with it. It's really, really important that you stick to your word on this. So stating that you want to become accommodating or that you are trying is an amazing first step, and I'm going to tell you that it's a huge leap that disabled people aren't used to seeing, and they're going to be thrilled. They're going to be absolutely thrilled the fact that you even have that, and that sets you apart from the competition with other businesses. If you're at least just saying, again, don't make it lip service though, but at least doing that. And it's really sad that in 2020, just doing the bare minimum is great and attractive, but let's raise the bar. But at the same time, this is how you're the best way to start. And again, in your hiring practices, if you can accept non-traditional CVs, so you might see CVs with employment gaps, you might see CVs without a lot of experience, or they might have more of their character traits rather than actual work experience or volunteer experience. And then go through an alternate interview process. Because a lot of the times, especially with neurodivergent people, if you ask us an open-ended question, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? We might take that as very logical. Like, we might take a very logical view of that and be like, just answer something very mundane rather than answering what you really want to know. So it's important that the jobs don't go just to the people who can pass an interview really well. It should really be going to the people who can actually do the work that you want them to do. And be very careful in your work postings, in your job postings, that you're actually asking for skills that are actually going to be needed and used on the job, and not asking to see skills that have nothing to do with the job. So for example, a lot of the times, you'll see something like the person might have to, I don't know, there might be a certain aspect of a social aspect that is added into a description somewhere, like they want you to be friendly and outgoing or something like that, when it's really like a back office behind a keyboard kind of job. And maybe they're checking for bugs, for example, and don't actually have to talk to anybody. So there's no reason for you to put social and friendly in the job description, because that will just basically make them say, well, that's not my job. Obviously they expect me to talk to people. Or sometimes they'll be like, has to be able to lift 70 pounds when there's actually no lifting involved in that job, or it's very minimal, or maybe it can be done by somebody else and the rest of the task can be done by the person who doesn't need to do the lifting. So just review what you have written and what you have and what your expectations are, and really try to base it on your actual needs. So once you've got us, how do you keep us? I really advocate for a much longer onboarding process. So if your onboarding process is already, let's say 3 months, then it should be 6 months. If it's 6 months, make it 12 months. If you can, as well, part of this onboarding or extended interview process could be an actual job, temporary job kind of placement, where they will work for 2 weeks in the job, and you'll see how they adjust to the tasks. And then, but make sure this is a paid thing. Don't just exploit people and try to get people to work for free and call it an internship or whatever. Pay them for those 2 weeks while they're learning the job, see how they perform, and then decide if you're going to hire long-term. If you're going to hire long-term, still do the longer onboarding. We need more feedback. We need feedback. We need to know what we're doing wrong, but we also need to know what we're doing well. Because we will come and we will going to look at the work, and we're going to try and optimize it for ourselves and how we work. And there's going to be times where we will ask for accommodations right off the bat if we've disclosed. And there's going to be things that we're going to discover that we're going to need accommodations on. But giving us this feedback will help us to know exactly where we need to keep tweaking so that we can eventually, hopefully, get it right. And so that's the same thing, allow for these adjustments, because even if, let's say, we've been in the job for 6 months and we're very productive and we're doing very well, we're performing very well, do not forget that we still need those accommodations. A lot of times what happens is, and I've had this happen too, you'll get into a job and you're doing very well, and then people will forget that you're autistic, or they'll forget that the accommodation that you needed was actually an essential accommodation, because they get so used to it. The same thing, how we get used to seeing people wearing glasses, and that's no longer seen as a disability. When you get very used to seeing how people work and it becomes normalized, we'll often forget that they still need the same accommodations that they had before, and they might need a little bit of an adjustment in that time. So now that you have us longer, it's also important to know what kind of profile of person you're working with, because there'll be some cases where you'll see people that don't want to be promoted. They are quite happy doing exactly what they're doing. And that's why I have it in bold, Kelly, I have to develop my people, because I hear that. Of course you have to develop your people. And there's different ways to continue to develop people and to continue to train people and upgrade their skills as much as they desire. But it's important also that what can happen if you try to promote or push somebody into something that they're just not ready for. So there's two kind of profiles, and they can actually go back and forth. And there's the novelty seeker and there's the routine keeper. So there's going to be a profile that needs to have new tasks and new projects coming at them. They might like to juggle 5 or 6 different projects and be able to work at them at their own pace. They might be very last minute with their deadlines. There are some other people that are going to want very strict deadlines, and they're going to want to know exactly what's expected at each part. And what can often happen is the routine keeper, if they have been given a great structure and everything's working really well, they then have the confidence to become a bit more of a novelty seeker. But if we start with the idea that people need the routine and they need that base in order to be comfortable and to feel safe before they move on to something else, you will eventually develop novelty seekers. To what extent, it's hard to say, because each person and each profile is different. But I think it's really important that not to put the way that you experience your job onto somebody else. So if you see a task and you're like, this person's been doing the same task every day and it's super boring, I can't believe, like, I would be so bored if I had this. Whereas I might look at it as, I'm really good at doing this task, and it gives me great satisfaction to know that I am doing this perfectly every time, every day. I know what to expect because I know I can do this. And I can tell you that I've had jobs where I did extremely repetitive, routine tasks, and I took great pride in it because I gave myself little challenges as I became better and better at it, where I said, well, I'm going to do it faster. I'm going to do it faster today, or I can get it down to exactly in an hour. I can do this much. And for me, that's where I added in my novelty. It was a little competition against myself to see how good I could do it. But to everybody else, it looked horrible and boring, and nobody else in the office wanted to do it. So I was having a great time. It was not a problem for me. So it's important that when you're looking at the different kind of profiles and you're looking at how people work, to kind of not judge it too much about what they're doing. The other issue that we do have is sometimes when increased demands come on us, So for example, if somebody says, hey, you're doing that really well, I'd like to promote you, or I'd like to give you a new task. We get this horrible imposter syndrome that makes us then self-sabotage. And look, I know when I say that, I've had people say, yes, Kelly, everybody has imposter syndrome. Absolutely. It's a human thing. We all experience that. But I'm going to argue that the reason I have a diagnosis and other people don't is because these aspects affect us so profoundly, so severely, that it impedes us from going on with our life in different ways. And that is where the disabling aspect comes from. So if you take, for a neurotypical person, when they experience imposter syndrome, and then times that by 1,000, that's what we're feeling. Also remember that we come with all our baggage from our childhood, where we've been told that we're no good, or we're not good enough, or we're not smart, or we're not capable. We're constantly corrected growing up to tell us that we're doing things wrong, we're not doing it the right way, or we're not doing it fast enough, or we're not even capable of learning this new ability. And so those loops are playing in our head as well. So always remember that that is part of what comes with people, with anybody. Anybody will carry some sort of trauma, but with the neurodivergent people, these are the kind of things that we've been told growing up. Any disabled person has always had very lowered expectations put upon them, and not just from teachers, but even from their own family. So when you try to promote us, sometimes the opposite can happen, where suddenly we freeze and we're like, oh no, now they've caught on to us or something, and we can't do this. And I've seen it happen so many times, where people basically self-sabotage themselves out of a job that they loved, and then suddenly the expectations were too high and they quit, or they ended up getting fired. And it's shocking and it's surprising. I've seen people who worked at the same place for 7 years and then suddenly just tanked. And it was just because the expectations have changed. If you do manage to get around to working in a way that you are going to securely promote somebody or give them new tasks, it's important, again, to start back at zero and do that onboarding process again with that new job or that new task, and have that feedback. Make sure you have that, I would say probably at least weekly feedback, and a lot of conversations. Again, it takes a lot of communication, and also give them the option that if it doesn't work out, take the pressure off and say, you know what, you can go back to your old job. No hard feelings. Don't worry about it. And just try to be flexible with that. So the unfortunate negative part is that sometimes we do have to get fired. And I put privacy, please. And a lot of times people kind of, smirk at that, and they don't get it. I can tell you of so many times where people were fired, neurodivergent people, friends of mine, have been fired, not in a group, but in a group setting, in front of everybody. So give people the privacy and the respect to do it privately in a room. If it's going to happen, try not to be kind of coy about it. You can be very direct, because a lot of times we'll be very worried coming up to a meeting, wondering what's happening, and you can actually say, well, we're going to be talking about your job, and I'd like to meet with you in private. And that's probably the best way. I mean, there's no fun way to put it, but it has to be done sometimes. So be explicit in what the issues were. Don't just say, it's because, I don't know, there was a project that got bunged up somewhere. It's important to tell people what they actually did wrong. And I'd even go backwards to that, is there should be warnings ahead of that, to say, if this does not get corrected, this is what's going to happen next, and then there will be a second warning, and then this is what will happen, and this is what you can do to correct it. Like, just be very clear and very explicit. Because otherwise, a lot of times what can also happen, and this is could be a legal thing, is that if you don't give them any sort of explicit reasons or examples of something they've done wrong, they're going to believe it was because of their disability, and that can open up a whole issue with human rights. So let's not go there. Let's be very clear about what you're doing. Make sure that you're not being discriminatory about it, and have everything kind of explicit and written down. What happens next and what do I do? And I'm bringing this from the experience of an employee where in one case, they were fired, but the employer helped them fill out their employment application, their employment insurance application, so that they would get EI. And I thought that was probably the most compassionate thing that they could do. The person was not very good at filling out forms and was just, in a state of shock and very upset. They still understood why they needed to be let go, but knowing what happens after that, knowing and that somebody actually supported them through that process to get employment insurance, to me was really just a nice compassionate touch. Also helping somebody understand what happens next. Well, you say, well, if you're fired, then please go clean up your desk. Here is a box for your stuff. We will escort you out of the building, whatever it is. But make sure that, again, that's very clear about what they do and what happens, because at that time their mind is going to be spiraling and they're, going to be kind of panicking. So how do we accommodate us on a daily basis? I think it's really important, again, to give people control over their environment as much as possible. Things like hot desking. If you're not familiar with hot desking, a lot of tech companies do it where each person is not actually assigned a desk. Anybody can go and pick a desk in the morning. And so where you're sitting one day might be different from another day. You might like the chair near the window, but unfortunately another employee got there before you and is sitting there. When you hot desk, you also can't leave your belongings there. So if there's things that you like to have with you at work, you have to pick them up and take them home every day and then come back the next day with that. So hot desking is really not the best for neurodivergent people. And now in this case, I'd say in this climate, it's not really hygienic anymore, and we're not really going into offices as much anyway. So this is probably not going to be as much of an issue. And I used to advocate for remote work all the time. And I used to say, hey, it's 2019, remote work should be everywhere. Now it is. And it's a wonderful accommodation for all types of disabilities. So if this isn't an option already, then I really think it should be in every workplace at this point, unless it's a direct service kind of place. But otherwise, for the most part, if you can work remotely, most people work very, very well that way. Of course, some people do like having to go into the office, so having a designated desk for that person would be an option then. Having that flexibility in schedule, or I really like, what is that called? It's the results only workplaces. So you give a person a task, you say you have to get these results, by a certain time, and not worry so much about how it gets done or when it gets done. There's going to be people who are going to be working from midnight to 6 a.m. and that's when they're happiest and that's when they're most productive. And then they get up, they go to bed at 6 a.m. and they get up at noon and they, whatever. If you're able to be flexible with that and just say, I need this particular work or this task done at a certain time, but how it gets done, we're not going to fuss. To me, that's how you're going to get the most productivity out of your workers. I put questions are not challenges, they are clarification, because a lot of times we will get, people will believe that I'm doubting them or don't have confidence in them because of the questions that I'm asking. And for me, I'm asking questions because I want to understand, because I'm unsure or I'm unclear. And it's really not because I am challenging the other person. It's really because I just don't understand. Also remember that neurodivergent people will have different processing speeds and different abilities when it comes to processing information. So for instance, I don't process as quickly hearing. So when you speak to me and you tell me something, it's kind of almost going to go in my one ear and out the next. I can often focus on a few things at a time, but if, let's say, you told me, okay, Kelly, I need this done by Monday, and I need this task by Thursday, and I need this task by next month, I'm going to nod and get, I understand. I'm going to leave that meeting, and I'm going to sit at my desk, and then I'm going to go, did they say they wanted what for Monday? I've lost it. So I need to take notes, and I need to ask a lot of questions. And you'd be surprised how many workplaces I've been at where they did not want me to take notes. It was some sort of personal affront to them that I was taking notes in the meeting. They didn't like that, or they didn't want to summarize what they had asked me in a text form. So I used to ask for email directions instead of having somebody just come and tell me. I mean, and it's nothing personal. It literally just flies out my head if you just come to my desk and tell me, I need you to do this. And again, I'm just making the reminder that don't forget that we still need accommodations, even if we're still performing well. Do not forget that we're still neurodivergent. Even if you've gotten used to it and it's become totally normal, we are still neurodivergent, and we still do need support. So here are some concepts to review before we get to the end. This intersectionality, again, that everybody comes, there's no person in the world that has just one identity. We are all a package of different identities. You know, you could have, even if you say, oh, a cis white man, sure, but he could be a father, he could be a son, he would be an uncle, he could be a coworker, he could be a patient for some reason. There's different identities that people are going to have no matter what, and we can't ignore that. So when we're looking at inclusion, we can't just say we're just going to work on one part of this. Remember that this kind of hiring process is really for the long haul. It's not something that's going to change overnight, especially a whole workplace culture. This whole idea of trying to change society to be more accepting, it's not going to happen overnight. So I'm in it for the long haul. I'm in it to basically support companies for the long haul. I mean, that's why it's called completely inclusive, is because I bring this idea of, yes, we're going to work on neurodivergence, but we're also going to look at all the other little issues that are going to impact that, and what influences the level of comfort at your company and how people are feeling. You know, I want to help people set up a plan for long-term success. So that's pretty much what I do. This idea of ongoing support, again, it's something that I'm committed to keep doing this until I die. So I'm there for long-term support. I'm there for strategic planning on how we're going to implement this and how we can work together. But just understand that it's a long process, and it's not going to be just a couple of months, and it's not going to be just a couple of check marks. But there are ways to go about it that are going to lead to real change and real inclusive workplace culture. And we're at the question part of our talk.
Wonderful, Kelly. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to listen to you and learn from you. And I took down a bunch of fascinating quotes that you said there. Does anybody have any questions for Kelly at this time, whether in the chat or if you'd like to raise your digital hand? I can't see. We have, this is excellent. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Normina.
Thank you.
So Kelly is going to put together, I lost my co-host, there we go. Kelly's going to put together a package, a little an information sheet for everybody with her contact information as well, that we will share with everybody. So you can get some more insights into Kelly and either reach out directly to Kelly or to us and let us know if you have any additional questions for Kelly. We have a couple of other comments in here as opposed to questions for you, Kelly. Great presentation, very informative. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Jumping off, oh, such a great reference, jumping off point for my new work with Autism Canada from Breckland. That's great.
And somebody asking, where does this work? Can I hire her to work with my son? That's for Monica. So Kelly, do you want to address that?
Yeah, email me. We'll talk. I mean, I need to know more of the story, but sure, for sure. Email me anytime.
Okay. Absolutely. Right. And Nermina asked, is there an employment agency that helps with neurodiversity? I can provide some insight too on that one.
There's different ones out there that focus specifically on autism. So it really depends on what your focus is on. And there's ones that focus on disability of different kinds.
And in various communities, there are some different organizations. So it does depend on where you are, which ones operate in that area that are specifically around employment for people with disabilities.
Yeah, Nermina, if you wanted to reach out and we can chat through that in further detail. And it's really interesting. We're part of the CASDA Employment Working Group for the policy recommendations. And one of the recommendations that we made is that there is specific autism and neurodivergence training for agencies so that there'll be even more out there that are familiar with neurodivergence and autism. But if you'd like to reach out, we're happy to connect with Kelly and or discuss it in further detail and share. There's another question down there from Courtney. I work as an employment counselor at Job Start with a capability program, which is for folks with disabilities. There are quite a few agencies that have similar programs. Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Courtney. Any other questions? No?
Looks great. I didn't know that I had imposter syndrome before today. It's a new topic to me, and thanks for sharing. So I have to admit that, you know, even for me, I mean, listening to Kelly and being able to relate to that, you know, challenges. So as an adult with, you know, we would call it ADD in my age group, but, you know, the current term is actually ADHD. That's inattentive. And it was something that I didn't know was a challenge. And as I got older and started encountering things and realizing, so every time I hear somebody speak, it's nice to be able to suddenly feel like, oh, I get that. I totally get that. As a kid growing up, there were a lot of things that I was like, why am I so weird? So Kelly, that was amazing. I think that it's wonderful for you to be able to not only share your own experience, but to also have that rounded, you know, extra pieces that apply to more than just you. And I love the intersectionality thing, because I think we oftentimes lose sight of that. And once someone's labeled, you know, that person is, it's almost like that's the only thing people see. And I think it's really important to bring that up and share that as a reminder that that isn't the one and only thing. There are a lot of other things that create who we are, and we're seen through so many lenses, and we live through so many lenses. So that's awesome. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you. Thank you. I did note that quote that you said. That was one of my favorite quotes you said today, Kelly, was we are all a package of different identities. So that really dovetails into what Sherry's highlighted as well. So thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining. We do have 2 upcoming iNOD webinars for August that we're very excited about, and they will be posted on our website very shortly, and we'll send this information out to you. But if you're available on August the 18th, please join us along with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and Magnet Align as we share inclusive job matching technology. And on August the 20th, we will be sharing information about the Brain and Hand solution and how it supports remote mental health support. So we hope to see you there, and please feel free to reach out to any of us at any time. And thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.